What other great mysteries have finally been solved? In 1981, a Soviet submarine ran aground in Swedish waters. This was a huge deal, although the Soviets claimed the sub was in distress and didn't purposefully enter Swedish waters. Basically, everyone in Sweden saw it as evidence that their waters were being invaded by spy subs. Plus, they did some snooping of their own and determined that the sub was emitting radiation, meaning it had nukes on board. So they went along with the Soviets' clearly false claim about accident and helped get the sub out of there, but panic was in the air. So the Swedes did exactly what you'd expect, and they prepared for more Soviet subs. I mean, when you see one Soviet sub, surely there are more, right? So Sweden developed advanced acoustic technology to detect subs, and they created a plan to basically seal off the waters when they heard a sub. And wouldn't you know it, a year later, they found a Soviet sub. Well, they didn't find it, but they absolutely heard it, and they cut off the bay and figured they just had to hunt the sub down. But after a month, they couldn't. They gave up and reopened the bay, but they assumed the sub found a way out. But they'll get it next time, and then it happened again. But they couldn't find it again, and then again and again with no clear pattern for a decade. What the heck? Thankfully, the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, so no more subs, right? Niet. Because the Russian subs are still coming. Wait, what? Okay, so now nothing is making sense. At this point, the Swedish military brought in outside experts to figure out what was happening. This included oceanographer types, who were obvious experts in the surrounding waters. The military then played the audio evidence of the Soviet submarines, only to be told they weren't submarines at all. They were fish, and the propeller-like sound was water being released from their swim bladders. And that is the story of how the Swedish military spent 10 years and tens of millions of dollars chasing gassy, tooting fish. This is a personal family mystery that got solved a few years ago, so nothing that would have gotten media attention. But my maternal great-grandmother once ran away from home to the big city, and came back pregnante. She refused to disclose anything about the father. Either way, even down to my generation, we've had unusually shaped feet. Rather flat with a strange angle. And it's made most regular shoes uncomfortable. It's not so bad for me, I take physically more after my paternal side of the family, but my brother and mother have it real bad. So does my cousin, who ended up seeking the help of a physical therapist. The therapist said that her feet are truly unusually shaped, and referred her to a specialist doctor who's an expert on feet. Apparently that's a thing. The doctor examined her feet and said that the only place in the world with distinct feet like this is a certain county in France with winemakers who've been stomping on grapes for centuries. He said that he's 99% certain that the feet come from there, that we must have close family lineage from that place. My cousin told our family and we were very confused. We most certainly don't have French relatives, until we realized great-grandma. The city she ran away to was known to house traveling craftsmen from all over the world. She must have hooked up with a French winemaker. We joke now that she had rolled over in her grave because this strange foot doctor had discovered her great secret. How many generations of vintners do you have to have in one place for people to develop special grape stomping feet? That's fascinating. I thought physical characteristics like this took thousands of years to develop into a norm. Did these people all just stay put in one place? Did no one migrate? That's a very stable community right there. Thanks for sharing. 3 Secrets of Fatima, a series of apocalyptic visions and prophecies which were purportedly given to 3 young Portuguese shepherds on 13th of May 1917. The first 2 secrets were revealed, but the 3rd was considered too shocking and dangerous by the Vatican to ever be made public. Until it was released, after all, and it was, well, a bit of a letdown. Lyle Stevick. I'm surprised he hasn't been mentioned here already. He was a John Doe case of a man who decided he didn't want to be alive anymore and acted on that in a motel in Amanda Park, Washington in September 2001. He signed into the hotel under the name Lyle Stevick, which wasn't his real name, and he was found dead in his room, suspended in the closet, with money left for the room and a note that just said he was self-deleting. No identifiable information was found on him. Police investigations at the time did not produce any results. He was only identified in 2018 via DNA analysis, but his family chose not to reveal his true identity. The true identity of Benjamin Kyle, the guy who had amnesia after being found unconscious in a Burger King dumpster. Genetic research discovered his name was William Burgess Powell. His story is still pretty crazy, as it was discovered that at some point in his life he had abandoned his family and all of his possessions to live on his own, and there are still no official records of him for the 20 years prior to him being discovered in the dumpster. Mary Toft. I mean, really, what the frick? Basically, this woman starts giving birth to copious amounts of rabbit parts. Woman taken to London and studied under intense supervision, and it turns out she was shoving the pieces up there days before the publicity. Oh. Human spontaneous combustion. It's not really a thing. It's actually where there was an overlooked source of ignition, then subcutaneous fat is absorbed into clothing and acts like a wick. Basically, they're a human candle. The Pioneer Gravity Anomaly. The space probe wasn't accelerating away from Earth the way we had predicted, but it didn't get noticed until the probe was way the frick out there. The next space probe got launched, gets way out there, and the same thing happens. What the frick? How does acceleration not work right? Does gravity just change really far away? Turns out the heat from the radioisotope thermoelectric generator was all coming off the same side of the space probe, and the extra particle radiation gave a thermal recoil force, resulting in an extra acceleration of, and I'm not making this number up, about an 80 billionth of a meter per second squared. Over enough distance, apparently, it all counts. Bermuda Triangle, or the Devil's Sea, a triangle-shaped section of ocean where airplanes and boats were known to disappear. Apparently, most stories were embellished, and there is so much traffic that goes through the area, it's actually a very small amount of vessels that go missing, percentage-wise. I can't help but feel like bringing up some of these is contributing to making the world seem a little less of a magical and incredible place, even though it absolutely is. As a kid, I used to dream of flying over the Bermuda Triangle and seeing what happened. Oh well. The Prophet Hen of Leeds. A hen was laying eggs with messages like "Christ is coming," and people thought the world was ending. Turned out the farmer was actually writing on the eggs herself and then reinserting them back into the chicken. The tomb of Jesus's previously unknown brother turned out to be a hoax to try and sell the tomb to a nobody for a lot of money. The French guy who claimed to be a missing boy in the 90s, he even lived with the crazy mother. Nicholas Barclay, aged around 13 at the time he went missing, was last seen playing basketball with his friends in his hometown of San Antonio, Texas, on the 13th of June, 1994. Barclay never made it home and has not been seen or heard from since. In 1997, Bourdin took Barclay's identity and was flown to the United States. Although Bourdin had brown eyes and a French accent, he convinced the family he was their blue-eyed son, saying that he had escaped from a child trafficking ring and the ring had altered his eye color. Bourdin lived with the family for almost 5 months until 6th of March 1998. The craziest part is they recently found out the brother was the murderer and murdered Barclay with permission of his mother. And the only reason the French guy got away with it is because the family didn't want to reveal that they knew who killed Barclay. Kids like Cinnamon Toast Crunch because there's a bunch of sugar on it, not because of the cinnamon or the crunch. My parents wouldn't let me buy Fruit Loops because it was unhealthy. Instead, they got me Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Still baffles me to this day, and I'm a father now. Rex McElroy. Over a good few years, he was an absolute piece of crap. Lived in Skidmore, Missouri. Groomer, unspeakable act offender, married this 14-year-old girl who he gave Stockholm Syndrome to avoid the unspeakable act charges, piece of crap lawyer to get him out of a literal attempted murder, attacks with a deadly weapon. It was also well known that he stole cattle or something like that, but because of the crappy law system, they couldn't do anything about it without direct proof. Oh, did I forget to mention he had kids with this 14-year-old wife? One of his crappy kids tried to steal some candy from a store in the 1980s. The store owner, who was 70, caught the kid, so Rex started stalking the family who owned the store, coming to their house and just standing in front, making threats and everything. In a confrontation, he tried to blow the owner's head off, but Ernest Bauernkamp, the owner, dodged and had his neck grazed, and he was quite hurt but alive. Finally, Rex was caught for this and found guilty of attempted murder, but bailed because he was rich. People would literally leave whenever he entered a bar. He bullied a sheriff into stepping down from his job and was constantly loaded with money, buying new trucks all the time. Well, eventually people got tired of his crap. Dozens of people followed him into the bar. McElroy finished his drink, went back out. As he started the car, an unknown amount of people opened fire on this absolute crock of crap, absolutely destroying him. As a matter of fact, they wanted him dead so bad that they found revolver casings on the ground, meaning someone had enough time to reload an entire revolver. There were numerous shooters, and the Stockholmed wife called out one shooter, but every other person there, of around 50 people, said they saw nothing, and hell, some even said that they heard nothing. So yeah, the guy was dead after near a damn decade of ruining this little town. Investigations were concluded, with nobody charged, no proper testification, and nobody sentenced. But we all know it was the townsfolk, and McElroy deserved it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. Roman concrete that resisted seawater, and the missing Roanoke colony. The lost recipe for the concrete turned out to be something we misinterpreted, and the Roanoke colony was abandoned because the settlers decided to live and mix with the natives. DNA tracing was actually able to connect this. Turns out the settlers just went to live with the natives and everyone knew it. People just refused to believe that white settlers needed help from Indians. Chupacabra has been pretty much explained by a guy who investigated it for 5 years and wrote a book called Tracking the Chupacabra. Long story short, the initial witnesses thought the movie Species was a documentary. Most subsequent sightings and bodies were wild animals that looked weird because they had mange. Molyneux's problem. If a man born blind can feel the difference between shapes such as spheres and cubes, could he, if given the ability to see, distinguish those objects by sight alone, in reference to the tactile schemata he already possessed? The answer is no. Well, the person who wrote that submission has been a little glib in their answer, but I do understand that we probably obtained the answer because we now have some limited capacity to give sight to those born blind, so that's cool. The Marfa Mystery Lights. Small town in West Texas has lights that can be seen dancing off the horizon in a certain spot some nights. For many years, the source of the light was not known, and explanations ranged from a mass hysteria to the ever-popular UFO. One researcher finally figured it out. The elevation changes and desert air would occasionally combine to distort and project headlights from cars on a highway several miles away. Reports of the mystery lights from the times prior to the highways or automobiles are probably campfires in the general area of the highway. Like many highways, the area was already used as a road for quite a while. How the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids. A French architect figured it out. They used an internal ramp system. Some of the turn stations for the ramps are still there. Really quite brilliant. The solution does not disappoint. The Kensington Rock. Found by an American farmer in like the late 1800s. Maybe? Covered in Old Norse runes which were claimed to be from around the year 1360, which would prove that there were white settlers in America long before Columbus, thereby justifying a lot of the purveyors of racist alternate history in the 20th century. The rock was later proved to have been forged by a Swedish settler just for fun some 100 years prior to its discovery, and people are still making documentaries about it, claiming it to be some wild, unrevealed truth of America's colonization. The identity of the Watergate whistleblower that eventually led to Nixon resigning. His identity was secret for 31 years, until 2005 when he was identified as Mark Felt, an FBI AD who had come down with dementia when it was revealed, and not by him. The Boogeyman. Albert Fish was an American serial killer who was also called the Boogeyman, and is thought to have popularized the term. This is the man your parents warned you about at night. He was an unspeakable act offender, cannibal, and murderer. While he committed several disgusting, awful, and depraved acts, the one that got him caught was the murder of a young woman named Grace Budd. He responded to an ad for work her brother put in the paper, but when he met the family, he changed his mind from killing him to killing Grace. After he killed and ate her, he wrote a letter to Grace's mother, explaining in detail what he did to her daughter. This letter was thankfully his undoing, as it provided the key to his capture. The police were able to trace it back to its source and arrest him. This letter has been made public, and if you're interested, you can read the full thing by searching. I can't even imagine being a mother and reading it. I'm so glad they caught him and he was taken off the streets. Who knows how many more people he would have killed. I've become skeptical when police solve a serial killing. They're often under a lot of pressure to find the killer. They sometimes blame a bunch of killings on one guy. There was a guy in Texas that confessed to the murder of a girl he had been dating. She was wearing red undies, and the cops started calling it the Red Panty Killer. He confessed, and then they asked him if he had killed anyone else, and he said, lots. Word got around, and the sheriff and Texas Rangers would tell the other guys to bring the case file, strawberry milkshake, and a pack of Lucky Cigs, and the guy would talk. He confessed to a lot of killings. Someone got curious and did a map of all the killings and when they happened. Turns out it was physically impossible for him to have been in all of those places at the time of the killings. The sheriff and rangers had a simple trick. They'd give the guy the milkshake and cigs and tell the investigators from other states to give him a bit of time and then interview him. But they'd leave the case file in a room with him all alone and he'd read the case file. They'd come in and ask questions and, miraculously, he'd know all about them. Case solved. In the end, it turned out his DNA was not on the panties of this person he'd confessed to killing, but some other guy's DNA was. But the sheriff, cops, and rangers consider all the cases to be closed to this day. The Romanovs. On 20th of July 1918, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children were executed by the Bolsheviks in the basement of a house on Ekaterinburg. No one knew where they were buried, and over the years, various people came forward claiming they were Princess Anastasia or Tsarevich Nicholas, and that they'd survived the execution. In 1979, the family's remains were located, but they only found 5 bodies. Had 2 of the children managed to survive after all? No. In July 2007, the remains of the other 2 children were found by an amateur archaeologist not far from the first burial site. Fun fact, the late Duke of Edinburgh assisted in the identification through DNA, as both he and the Romanov children were descended from the same daughter of Queen Victoria. And every fan of the animated film Anastasia wept at the news. The narrator apologizes deeply and sincerely at the revelation of the fate of a more than 100-year deceased individual and will not be paying for therapy of distraught viewers. Sarah Yarborough was from a few doors down, who watched over us on several occasions when we were young kids. She was killed and dumped in a bush at the high school like a piece of trash, and it was absolutely devastating. It wasn't a small town, but when it happens to your neighbor, it's very much in your sphere of awareness. Everyone was scared. I remember the media circus at the home and the eventual tapering off of said circus, and the family moving away to get away from the undoubtedly bad memories and constant reminders that their kid was murdered and the killer was out there and still on the loose. It turned into a cold case. Every now and then, I looked for news of an update, even though I grew up and moved away. I did this for years, decades even, because it always bothered me as an early childhood memory. A couple of years ago, I finally saw a local news report that DNA evidence and genealogy databases led to the arrest of the murderer. For me, that was an emotional moment of getting closure, and I can't imagine the magnitude of emotions and fresh wounds felt by the parents having learned that nearly 30 years later, the investigation on the cold case paid off. Amelia Earhart. She crashed. They found her remains. Does ghost hunting work? Nope. 12 or so seasons of it on TV and not a single ghost found. The Weeping Jesus statue in India mystery. Apparently a Jesus statue started crying and all Christians, along with some Hindus, started to drink the tears. It turned out to be sewage. It's hilarious until you read that the guy who discovered it had to flee to Finland due to hate letters. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon have long been a mystery since no archaeological evidence was ever found for any such garden in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar, who many associate with the gardens, was not known to have enacted any major works of engineering, which would have been necessary to water the gardens. Many have suspected that they may never have existed at all. A popular modern theory is that the gardens weren't Babylonian but actually Assyrian. The Assyrian king Sennacherib was well known for his waterworks and aqueducts, and his palace in Nineveh was documented to have lavish gardens. It's believed that people mistakenly attributed the gardens to Babylon. The name Babylon means Gate of the Gods, and was used to describe several cities in Mesopotamia. Nineveh's gates was named after different gods by Sennacherib, so it would have been likely to have been referenced that way. Archaeology at the site of Nineveh has been difficult in recent years because it's very close to Mosul, in Iraq. The region had been occupied by Islamic fundamentalists who intentionally damaged parts of the site. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.